We need a few reaction shots of everyone going, ooh, ah, oh my God. So we can splice them in at the most inopportune times. If you throw it at me, you get bonus points, because I'm nimble. I can dodge. So today we're going to write a service about nothing in AWS. It's going to be the magical term of serverless, which means that there's no servers. Surprise. So first up, a little bit about myself. That's my name. Good luck pronouncing it. I work at SciTech, who is one of the sponsors, the sponsor of this presentation. I was recently AWS Developer Certified, which is just a fancy piece of paper that lets me know that I took a test. I used to work at Amazon for 6 years, so I've got a little bit of experience there. And I'm a huge Seinfeld fan. So before we get going, can I get like a show of elbow? Who's a Seinfeld fan? No, elbow, please. Thanks, okay. And then show of pinky, who is a AWS user, is familiar with it, or? Okay, we got a knuckle? Okay, you fingers, pinky man. Okay, cool. So we're gonna be doing a pretty entry-level thing today, just to get your toes wet. At any point, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or whatever appendage you want, and we'll get you a microphone. At brief times, we're going to pause to kind of do solo stuff, and if you have questions, you can ask me. I've also appointed Brittany back there as an aide. You can ask her questions as well. But let's get going. Right, so the services we're going to interact with today are API Gateway, Lambda, RDS, CloudFormation, and a splash of Route 53 if you have access to DNS. As I said before, the goal is to set up an API that you hit on an endpoint, and it's just going to return to you a bunch of quotes from the show. So hopefully all of you guys have a YAML editor, which is just a text editor, an IDE of your choice for whatever language is of your choice. If you don't have the AWS CLI, it will be helpful. We'll use it a little bit. If you don't have a MySQL CLI, then you can just start up a MySQL Docker container, because we're going to be injecting some data that I've prepared. Git. And if you have a domain name, you'll be able to set up a custom domain name for your endpoints. If not, you can use the predefined execute API thing. All these slides are on my GitHub. I'll leave this up for a second because my last name is complicated. The code is the final form. The CloudFormation templates are broken into stages. There's a like 00-start, 01 ACM. So we're going to be running these over time, but we're going to talk about what they are, what they contain, and what they do. Does anyone need more time to get the GitHub link? Okay. Cool. Back? Okay. Should have made a bit.ly. That would have helped. Ready? Cool. Does everyone here have access to an AWS account? That's a yes? Okay. If you don't, you can sign up probably now, would be good. You can use the free tier. I believe everything we're doing today will qualify under the free tier. You might still need to enter credit card details, but you should not be charged. And if you tear down everything after this talk, then you will not incur anything at all. So AWS is a series of services. It's kind of like a startup incubator all under this one hub. All of these things work together, talk together, and use kind of the same semantics across the different services. And AWS has, they have tons of regions, and the way that it works is there's US East 1 and US West 2, which are North Virginia and Oregon, are like the first regions that new services hit. So not all of the services are currently available in all of the regions. Usually it'll be rolled out over time. I believe they're working towards getting all of the services in all of the regions, even when they launch new regions. But we'll hold our breath for that day. For now, you need to make sure that you're doing everything in the same region, because cross-region calls get complicated and are not fun. I have chosen to use EU West 3, which is Paris, because who doesn't love Paris? Other good options would be EU West 1, which I think is Dublin. No, Frankfurt? Dublin. Frankfurt? Anyway, EU West 1, we'll pull up the browser and we'll see. That's the other good one to use. Basically anything that's pretty close. I believe most of the services we're touching are big enough that they will be deployed nearby. If you pull up the console, the first user that you have access to when you sign up is the root user. This is basically the user that you use to create your admin user, and then you should not log into that again. It's the all-powerful user that has access to everything, and if those credentials leak, it's a little dangerous. I'm going to walk you through creating an IAM account. So in this little box here in the middle, it's the magic search box. You can just type IAM, which is the Identity Access and Management. If you click the service that comes up, here you can see all of the users you've created, groups, roles, etc. Users are entities that have the ability to log in or to use programmatic access. Roles are usually used by either services, or you can kind of federate into a role. And it's also either console or command line, or API rather. Groups is just another way to attach policies to things, and identity providers is for Cognito, so that for web federation. Doesn't matter which one you're talking about, they all have this concept of a policy. A policy is a JSON document that contains a list of statements and basically things that the user can and cannot do. So we can take a look at, I don't think I have an interesting one. This is the one that, so this is a managed policy, which means that AWS itself has created this, and you can just attach it to your various roles. You can also do inline policies, where you can type it out yourself and you can be more specific. But so for example, this one has, the effect is to allow. The action is any S3 call, and it's on any S3 based resource. So any bucket, key, anything like that, this has access to. And then, for example, the admin one is just ***. You can do everything. So here is a Lambda role, and it's a little bit more complicated. We're specifically allowing this action on this resource, which is basically any log in this account. The resource format is standard. It always starts with ARN, and then it's AWS, unless you're in China, then I think it's AWS-CN. The name of the service that you're talking about, the region, the account number, and then this is kind of the service-specific identifier. You can replace most of these things with stars to mean anything. It does glob matching. And so this basically allows us to create any log group in this account, and this one is allowing us to create log streams and put logs to this particular log group, which is the CloudWatch thing. Anyway, for now, if you're logged in as your root user, you will want to click on Add User, give it a name that is relevant. You'll want to check programmatic access because you're going to want access keys. And you will want the console as well, because this is the user that you're going to want to use to do everything. After you choose that, you can go to Next, and you can attach existing policies, and you can just attach the admin policy. We're just creating another admin user here. If you go to tags, this is just tags. Yeah, you don't need to do it. It's optional. You can review it to make sure everything is as you want. and then create the user. You will be given, this is the access key ID, and this is the secret access key. Don't copy these are mine. They're very precious to me. This is what you will use for SDK access, either with the CLI or if you're using an actual SDK. These are the two things that you will need to pass it so that it knows who you are. This will also provide you a password that you will have to change, and you can send the email to someone. Once you have this, you can log out and then log back in with your same account. You will need to know your account number. So here you can see in the middle of this ARN, this is my account number. You can also get it from, not here, I guess. Oh, because it's a thing.
Julian, do you attach any policy to the user?
For now, just attach the admin policy, because this is the user you're going to use to do all of your magic.
Trying to send the email, but it's trying to open mail client. Can I do it by that?
It's a mail to link, so it's whatever you have it configured to. But the email is not necessary because you have the password there. Yeah. Everyone have a user or have questions? Cool, moving on. Yeah, we're going to operate under this user instead of your root user. Yeah, you don't want to expose the credentials of your root user, basically. So you'll want to isolate them and use just your admin user. Marco, you had a question?
Just those two are the policies that you attach. Administrator access and IAM.
Yeah, so this was attached automatically. And it basically is going to require you to change the password as soon as you log in.
So I don't have to attach.
No, it does it automatically. Because it gives you a temporary password to give to whoever is using it, and then for security reasons, you should automatically change that. Okay. Coming back here. Now we're going to talk about CloudFormation. Has anyone heard of infrastructure as a service? Ish? Okay. So there's a few different tools for this. Yep.
Sorry, can you go back a second to the previous, to the finishing of creation of the user, because I'm lost there.
I don't know if I can go back that far. I cannot. What do you need?
Okay, you were on attach policy then.
Yeah, when you attach policies, just choose the administrator access policy.
Okay. And then go forward.
And then just go next until it's created,
Okay.
and it'll show you the keys and password. Anyone else? Cool. CloudFormation. So there's a few different things that do this now. One of them is called like Terraform, and I think Google has their own thing. But basically what it is a text document that allows you to define all of the resources your service needs to function. And it allows you to establish connections between them so that you can go, if you're launching between different stages like dev and prod or different regions, you can take this file, give it to something, and then it'll just set up your service for you. So it allows you to have kind of version controlled, revision controlled, and there's a little bit of accountability, and you know exactly what your service is going to produce. So the first few things that we're going to do are we are going to walk through creating a CloudFormation stack using the start template that I have provided. It's possible to do it in YAML or JSON, yes. Okay. I'm just going to talk about this, and you can do. Okay, we won't do anything for a second.
One more question. Where do I get the IAM username? Because I have the account ID or alias.
It's the username you chose when you typed in a thing. So I chose silly, for example.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, so it's just a text document. It can be YAML or JSON. You can look at the documentation if you want more details about specifics of how it works and all the things, but I'll talk about some of them. There are some other tools that you can use to help your infrastructure. There is serverless, which allows you to write a serverless file, and it kind of manages some of the API gateway Lambda integrations for you. There's Terraform, which is a cloud agnostic. They're both cloud agnostic tools, so you can write it in one language, and if you're deploying to Google or to AWS or Azure, you just use the same file. There's also a thing called SAM, which is the serverless application model, which I'll talk about later. That's created by AWS to simplify creating Lambdas and API gateway. And it's just a small transformation to basically it uploads your code to S3 first, and then updates your template for you, and then creates your stack. So when everyone is ready, we can. Yeah, you'll want to log in with that user, and that's the user we're going to use for the rest of the evening. Can I get a show of pinkies of who's still working on the IAM user thing? That's not a pinky, sir. Thank you. No, so you'll need the account number, and then you use the name of the user that you gave it, and then the password that was generated. You can either find it when you look at the ARN. If you just, yeah. Also, if you just go to the IAM homepage, which there will be a sign-in link at the top, and this sign-in link will pre-populate the account number for you. That's probably the easiest way. You are also able to customize it and give your account a name. You can do that if you want. So the first thing we're going to do in our CloudFormation stack is we're going to create two resources. The first is an RDS database. RDS stands for, I think, Relational Data Service or Data Store. Relational Data something. It's the service that allows you to create a database. You can create Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, MS SQL. They also have their new one that is Aurora. There's a lot of configuration options for that in terms of clusters, making a single host, scaling. There's a lot of options. We're going to make a very bare bones single service, single server instance that's going to store basically all of our quote data, and then that's what we're going to be using to query. The next thing is if you have access to DNS, we'll create a hosted zone in Route 53. Route 53 is the DNS service. The name comes from the fact that DNS uses port 53 to do its communication. And it's zone files with DNS records. You can also have it do connect it to a load balancers, connect it to API gateway. There's a lot of cool aliasing things that you can do to work within AWS services. And a fun thing I learned is you can have subdomains have different zones on a different place. You just need to set up an NS record for that subdomain. Fun fact. So we'll pull up the start.yaml file, the 00-start.yaml in the CloudFormation folder, and this is the first thing that we're going to work with. So I want to talk about it for a second. Can everyone see that? Cool. So the top of this is pretty boilerplate. The template version is just the thing you use to declare the version. It obviously has not changed in a while. It's just a fixed string that you can pretty much copy between template to template until they maybe release a new version. The description is just something for you to know what this stack is for, what it's about. And so this is description there is to create MySQL and a Route 53 hosted zone. The next section, the parameters, these are inputs into your script, into your template. So you can have customization options. For example, we have database names, usernames, passwords, and then the domain name that you will be using for Route 53 if you provide one. There's a few options on the type of the data, some details about it for the user entering in the values, whatever default thing you might have. You can have it do pattern matching, size limitations, and some kind of feedback to the user of why this doesn't match. Um, the next thing here is a condition. A condition, you're all developers, you understand what that is. And so this is basically saying if you have not provided a domain name, then useRoute53 will be false. And so we can use this for our resources to only create DNS-related resources if you've specified this. So if you don't, it should theoretically still work. Theoretically. The next block is the big chunk of it's the meat of the template. And this is what defines your actual resources. So the format of this is first you give it a name. So these names are not very unique here, but it's hosted zone, database security group, database, and that's all we're starting with right now. Looking at the hosted zone, you can see the condition here, useRoute53. That means we're only going to create this resource if you've specified a domain name. If you haven't, then it's not going to create it. The next thing that is type. Type and properties are the two fields that are pretty much required. Well, type is the only field that's super required. Properties is where you define all of your customization options. And so the type is this kind of string that is AWS : the name of the service, : and then the name of the thing you're trying to create. So all of these things kind of map to API calls within the AWS SDK. And so in this case, we're creating a hosted zone, and we're giving it a name of the domain name that you specified. And that's the input to that API call. Behind the hoods, what CloudFormation is doing is it translates these fields into an API call, and then it sends all this data to the service. The service then tries to create the thing, and then they have a response that they send back with it's the logical resource name, which in this case is going to be a hosted zone ID, and then there's other attributes that it can also contain. If it fails, it also will return with a failure, and it'll tell you why. The next thing that we're creating is a security group. This is basically to allow everyone to access this database. This is bad practice, I'm telling you right now. You should not do this in a production environment. But for the sake of this workshop, it just makes life a little easier, and you should probably delete this after we're done. Normally, you'd want to limit it to specifically the service or the IP address that you are using to connect to the database, so it has a much more restricted access. The security groups are interesting because you can specify like a CIDR, classless internet domain routing thing to say like anything in this IP range can access the service, but you can also specify different security groups. So if you create a different component that is part of a security group, then you can just say that this security group has access to that security group, and then it's just an automatic behavior that they can talk to each other. Yeah.
I don't understand why it's a bad practice now. Exactly for the security groups.
Security groups are good practice. This is a bad practice because it's allowing the world.
That one.
Yeah, I'm just saying anything can talk to port 3306, which is the MySQL port, and then it's over TCP. So that part is the bad practice. Creating security groups is ideal. You should be doing it. This is just to make our lives easier for this presentation workshop. The final resource of this template is the actual database instance itself. So you can see that it is AWS RDS DB instance. We've given it an allocated storage of 5. I think this number correlates to gigabytes. There's a lot of things in AWS where you just have this number and it's not clear what it represents. Like in ECS, which is like a Docker container service, you can specify CPU units to give to your thing and just an arbitrary number for memory. The memory definitely maps to like megabytes, but the CPU units are not exactly megahertz or gigahertz. It's just a weird thing. But in this case, we're giving it 5. We're creating it on the instance type of a DB-T2 micro. This is a database type instance. The T2 is a tiny, and the micro is a small tiny. There are several different instance classes. There are some that are CPU optimized, memory optimized, storage optimized, IOPS optimized, GPU optimized. When you're creating an instance through EC2, you can basically pick an instance type tailored to your use case and then choose something that has the number of cores in memory that you want based on that. So there's a lot of flexibility. This particular type is catered to databases, so that's why we're using it. The T2 is just within the free tier, so it's not the most powerful thing, but it's going to work for our purposes right now. The identifier is kind of just a name, and so you can see here we're using some fancy CloudFormation thing. This bang sub notation allows you to replace variables in a string so that you can have a resulting string. Because I would want to call this, in this case, the database name -devjam-db, but there's a variable there because the database name is an input that you provide earlier. So we use this bang sub thing to pass in the new value. And so you can see here we've defined that we're going to use db name, and then the next block is a JSON object that has a name to value. If instead we had done this, we actually don't need this. And we can do that because it knows what database name is. It's defined within there, within the template. There are also a few special things with this. There are some predefined AWS things, which are like AWS : region, which is the region that the template is being executed in. AWS : account ID, which is the account ID that it's operating under. The other special one is no value, and you use that when like you have a variable that might be empty, and if you give it an empty thing, it's going to blow up. So you have to tell it that no, there's no value for that. The last thing that you can do with this that's interesting is you can,
Where is database name actually defined? Is that going to be a parameter to the script when we run it?
yeah, it's the first parameter.
We pass that as a command line arg.
We're going to run it in the console, but you can also do it through the command line arg. When we go through the console, it'll actually prompt you for these values. We'll see in just a moment. Some of the resources have other properties. So for example, an S3 bucket, S3 bucket is just a storage thing. So you can have a bucket name, you can have a bucket ARN, you can have a S3 website address. All of these things can be accessed with a get attribute function, or if you're using the sub function, you can just do like S3 bucket dot S3 website URL, something like that. So the resources will sometimes have properties, and you can get the properties in multiple ways. Anyway, we're specifying the database name, the type of database it is. The username and password are fields that you provide. Multi-AZ. Does anyone know what an AZ is? Yes, it's an availability zone. So my AWS operates under the concept of you need to be prepared for a data center to go down. So within each of the regions, like EUS3, for example, you have EUS3A, EUS3B, and EUS3C. These are technically 3 data centers in that same region, so that if any one of them goes down, you can have a service running in the other one. So it's fault tolerance. And they suggest that when you are designing your services, you design them to be multi-AZ to handle any kind of issues that might come up. The last thing here is our security group, which is defined above. That's basically saying allow open access to the world for MySQL. And you can see here we're using the get attribute function to get the group ID from this database security group. And you can see that this name here is the same name that we called the resource above. I have a pointer. Cool. So the database security group is the same name here. The last thing in this template is outputs. Outputs are there's another tab in the CloudFormation screen that shows you values of the things you've created. Later, I've used it to like build the URL for your API gateway, so you don't have to piece it together yourself. You can kind of just click a link, but you can put kind of whatever you want here. You can also export these values so that another template can consume them, can import them. That goes beyond the scope of this talk. Moving on. Does anyone have any questions about this? I realize it's a lot of arbitrary jargon. Okay. Moving on. I would like you guys to go to the console. And in the console, you can, in the magic box, you can type CloudFormation, and you'll click on the first thing that comes up here. When you get there, you'll see a Create Stack button. Does anyone not see this? Okay. When you're creating the stack, we're going to specify that the template is ready because I've written it for you. And you're going to upload a file. And here you can choose the YAML file 00-start.yaml. It's going to automatically upload it to S3, and you'll see an S3 URL appear at the bottom. And then you can press Next. If, for any reason, there is an invalid template, if it's not formatted correctly, or you've done something very wrong, it will actually not let you proceed. It will tell you there's a problem. So if you click Next, now you can specify the stack details. This is where you put in the inputs, the parameters that we've defined at the top of the page. So the stack name is not a parameter we've defined, but this is just the name you want to give the thing for your own reference. So in this case, I've called it Dev Jam Workshop, because now I know what this is. Then below here, you can specify the input parameters. So give the database a password of your choosing. You'll want to take note of this because we're going to use it later. Give it a username, an admin username. You can give it a database name, and then you can give it your DNS name. For folks that work at SciTech, you can use yourname.workshop.devjam.io, I believe. Whatever you want. It just has to be unique. Because I'll have to create them. Does anyone have any questions about this so far? You can pretty much put anything for most of them. There are some limitations in terms of like what kind of characters you can put. For the domain name, you want to put a valid, fully qualified domain name. You don't need the dot at the end. But you'll want to pick something that you have access for DNS because we're going to later actually use this to talk to our API. You can, I believe you can just leave it blank, and you can use the default execute API as well. When you are ready, you can just click Next. Basically go next through the whole thing until you get to the end, and then let it create. It's going to take a minute, so I'm going to show you the values, basically the different tabs of the page. Yeah?
Do we have to set the tags and permissions?
You do not need to specify any tags. Those are the best example I've seen of tags used is like in large corporations. They want to tag that, you know, this thing comes from this team or these group of people, and then they can query based on the tags to find the resources attached to that or relevant. And it's just an easy way to categorize different things. For like your everyday kind of stuff, for smaller things, tags are less interesting. But you can use them in whatever way you want. They're just metadata. Permissions, you don't need to specify anything here because as long as you're running under the admin user, you should have all the permissions necessary to create these resources, and then that's fine. Yep. Anyone else? Cool. So after you click the final button for the create, you'll be taken to this events tab. So the first page here is a general overview. It has the stack ID, which is another resource. So here the resource name is CloudFormation, and then the stack has the name and GUID with your description, the status of your stack, when it was created, when it was updated, Drift status is if you've modified your resources outside of CloudFormation. It's called a drift, which basically if you run your template again, it might cause problems because your services are not in line. So you want to make sure that you keep your CloudFormation templates up to date. If you modify your service, you should do it through CloudFormation. Termination protection just prevents you from deleting it. If you've used a role to create it, yeah. When you go through the create, you'll see all of these events. And so let me find here. So when you first create the thing, you'll see that it's user initiated, and it's saying, like, you have requested a change to the stack or a creation of the stack. And then it goes resource by resource, and it does, create in progress or update in progress, and it'll take a little bit of time. And this was a bad example. Here you can see, create complete. And then once it's done, the entire stack will have update complete. And so you'll see the real-time semi-real-time delayed status of your resources being created. And if there is an error, you'll see the relevant error text here that'll help you kind of troubleshoot what you did wrong. My experience with CloudFormation is that if you're just kind of diving in CloudFormation first, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So start small, work your way up, and fix things as you go. The first time you create the stack, if there is an error, you have to delete the stack and create it again. Times after that, if you try to update the stack and there's an error, it'll just roll back to the previous good state.
I run into an error.
Okay?
I need to delete the stack.
You'll have to delete the stack and create it again. If you need help fixing the error, let me know. I'll come around in a second.
My password is too short.
Yeah, I think also I will fail for the same reason.
Yeah, so the unfortunate thing is that sometimes it does take a few minutes before you see the failure. So you're sitting there waiting, hoping for it to succeed, and then your hopes and dreams and life aspirations just go out the window when you see it fail. So don't get too attached. And as I said, start small, work your way up. The database does take a while to create. That's why I wanted to start with it. And we also have to load the database, so that takes a while.
It will roll back automatically, or you have to roll back?
It'll go into create failed, some state similar to that, and you'll need to delete it and recreate it because you're creating it for the first time. After the first time, it will roll back to the last good state. Yeah.
When it rolls back in this case of the database, is the database getting preserved or is it preserved?
So in this case, it's going to be deleted because it's new. But let's say it's 2 iterations later, you have everything, you make a change to your database. It will attempt to make a snapshot before it does anything so that you can reserve. You can restore it. That's the word I'm looking for. There are options that you can specify to disable that and to configure, I think, the name of the snapshot that gets created. Yeah, by default, they're trying to do sane things to protect you from hurting yourself. So this is the Events tab. The next tab of interest is the Resources tab. The Resources tab is where you can see the various resources that you've defined. So all of those key names within the template. So this is the final phase. So you're not going to have all these things, but you'll see here I have database. It has a physical ID, which is the the DevJam workshop -devjam-db, and this is the link to RDS. So you can go to the RDS service page and see that database. Not all of the services do that. You can see for the custom zone, it doesn't do anything. Where is my thing? You can see your security group. You see the type of the instance and the status of it. Usually, things will be like a green update complete, create complete. Yeah. Any questions about resources? Cool. The next tab is the outputs. So these are the things that we saw at the bottom of the template. So these are for quick access. You can see here your database URL, so you can easily find it because on the previous screen you just had a name. So you'd have to go to RDS, then find it on there, and then you could have it. But instead, we've just made it an output here, and you can consume it much easier. That's that. You also have your descriptions here. If you did specify an export name, it would show up here, and this would be the value that you use when you import it in another template. That's a little more complex. If you have questions about that, I can talk about it later. The next tab is the parameters. So these are all of the input fields that you put in to the template. Now, the password it knows is a password because I think I set no echo. And so it's not going to show that one to you. But everything else you can see here. So if you're ever unsure of like, well, what value did I use for this? You can see it here. And when you go to update the stack again, it'll actually preserve these values, and you don't have to type them in again unless they're different. The template will show you the template that you just entered. So this is coming. This is the final template, and you can see the various, our parameters and our various resources, and similarly our outputs at the bottom. It's very similar. Change sets is a thing that we're not going to worry about. I think it's mostly used for the SAM case or it's kind of like a stage rollout of I want to create this change set, and then I want to execute this change set. Most of the time in this case, we're going to just create and execute at the same time, so we don't really care about it. Does anyone have any questions about this? Is everyone waiting for their stack to be created? Yeah, Carlo? Did you? Waiting, okay, that's fine.
So change set is kind of a migration thingy?
Not really, no. It's like, say you have a template. I mean, we can do an example.
So it's not for the database, for templates.
Database. I don't follow what you mean. Let me show you an example. Okay, bad example, because I'm not actually making any changes. Let's.
I got the gist.
Yeah.
So it was about changes within the.
Yeah, you can create it as a change set and then apply it later. And so that kind of allows you to review what things are going to be changed. So if you're updating this programmatically, you might first want to create a change set, then review the results of that, and then execute it. But in the case of a human doing it, can I go back? No. That final screen right before you click create, when you're updating a stack, if you give it a second, it'll actually show you what it's doing that's different from what's there. It'll show you the differences. So it'll tell you like, I'm creating this new thing, I'm deleting this old thing, I'm modifying this, or you've changed a value here and it needs to be replaced entirely. It's not just a change. So it will be, the old one will be deleted, the new one will be created, not in that order. So you can see that there, and that's kind of equivalent to what a change set does. Okay. Anyone have questions about this? So we can see the version of MySQL that it's running. We can see that instance class that we specified. There's also some metrics about, how much CPU it's using, whether there's any connections to it, read and write IOPS. Here we can also see the endpoints, the port, and the fact that it's publicly accessible. You can also see the security groups here that we've defined earlier. And you can see here that we have inbound and outbound kind of free reign. It's the Wild West in this database. Here you have a lot more specific details about all the different things. You have backup and restore. You can configure automated backups. I think by default, it looks like it's every day it'll create a backup. And then you can choose to restore at any point. Deletion protection is a thing that some of the services have that basically require you to do an extra step before you can delete it to prevent from a user just clicking wildly. you can also configure encryption at rest so that the host, the instance that the database is running on, can have all the data encrypted. I didn't do this here because there's no sensitive data. But you would do this with KMS. KMS is the key management service. It lives within the IAM homepage, and you can create keys. It uses envelope encryption. It creates data keys, and it manages all that for you. So it's kind of magical. You can see here also in terms of like tags, I think you were asking earlier, it automatically tags it based on the stack that was used to create it. So it's just if you had additional metadata that you wanted to attach to it, this is where it would show up. Yeah, it's pretty much everything you would expect from like an overview page of a database.
Is it normally it takes all this time to create?
Yeah, the databases are very slow to create. My experience is that databases in CloudFront are super slow, and it's like you start it and go get a coffee, have some lunch, go for a jog, and then maybe it'll be done when you come back. That's not creepy at all. There are a few things that are pretty slow. If you went and you created it manually, it would also be about that slow. But while it's creating, you can actually go to RDS and see that your database is there, and it'll probably say creating. It might say created, in which case within 5 minutes, CloudFormation will update. So the other thing that we would have created is a Route 53 zone. So mine has this extra CNAME record here, but you'll just have these items here. Oh no, it's this guy. You'll just have these two in the middle where it's just a zone. It's ready for DNS queries, and it's good to go. It's not too special. And that's the gist of what you should have created.
Creation events, there are more logical ideas. For example, there are 3 databases in my screen.
3?
I don't know if it's because it's.
Are the events just dumped there one after the other?
The events are basically showing you like a time-based thing of this happened.
Okay.
Yeah. If you see 3 in the resources tab, then you've done something wrong. But it's just showing you the progress of the creation. Because, for example, here you can see create in progress, and then create complete. So it'll show up a few times, and that's nothing to worry about. So there's a few things that we're going to do now to prepare ourselves for the final step. Number 1 is we're going to seed the database with the magical quotes. And number 2 is we're going to set up an SSL certificate so that you can operate with HTTPS and be like all the cool kids with security. Now, we'll also need to set up the DNS in order for you to create the certificate. So I'm gonna talk you through some steps, and then we're gonna kind of work individually, and I'm gonna help the SciTac people set up their things. Once your hosted zone is created, you will see NS records. One of these tabs here. You will see here these NS records, and this is what you want to go to where your main zone is hosted or your registrar, and tell them to point your domain towards these records here. And this is the Route 53 name servers. Yes?
Can you show again how to reach this page?
Yeah. So if any page you're on, you can click services at the top. You can type in correctly Route 53 or routes and click on that. You'll click on the word hosted zones, and you'll see whatever zones you have. One of them will be the name that you created earlier. And if you click on that, then you can see all of the records that are associated with that zone. The relevant ones for right now are these NS records. You need to specify that with your current provider. Some DNS hosts do not allow you to specify NS records for subdomains because they are not hip with the times. If you're in that position, I'm sorry. We can probably set you up a dev jam one for the purposes of this workshop, and then tomorrow I'm going to go through and delete them all. So if you don't have DNS, you can do whatever .workshop.devjam.io. Yes?
I have got DNS.
You have?
I don't have it.
Okay. Yeah. So put like your first name or your last name or something unique to you, .workshop.devjam.io. And then once we all kind of break and do our own thing for a moment, I'm going to collect all of the records from you and set them all up so that you can actually use them. Yeah, it's going to take a time. Unless you want to help me. Do you want to help me? Huh? Yeah? Okay. Where is mouse? Oh, the propagation? Yeah, as long as no one goes to visit it right now, it'll be fine. Because if you haven't visited, then it won't be cached. Once you visit it, then it gets cached. So no one go to your domain names yet. But I think they're the TTL for DevJam. Boop. I'm a Vim fan. I know a lot about Vim. It's a very long time. That's a long time. So don't visit your thing. So this doesn't exist. 15 minutes. So it's not too bad. Okay. The other thing that's going to take a long time is seeding the database. So in the repository, you'll see in the SQL folder, there is seinfeld.sql.gz. It's like 8 megabytes of quotes. It's the entire corpus of the show, with the exception of the recap shows. And you'll need to populate it into the database. You can use a command like the one here. The RDS host is that host name that was the output of the CloudFormation stack. The user is the username that you provided. The DB name is the database name that you provided. And then you'll be prompted for the password that you specified. So everyone can go ahead and run this. If you need help, let me know. And then while everyone is doing this, I'm going to try and collect DNS records. Okay, one second. So the RDS host is either in the output of the CloudFormation, or if you go to RDS, somewhere on there you'll see a host name. The user is the user you specified, and the DB name is the database name you specified. So you can get those from the parameters tab in CloudFormation. So the next thing that we need to do is we're going to create a SSL certificate for this. Now, because we're using API Gateway, we're actually attaching the SSL certificate to CloudFront. CloudFront is a CDN service, content distribution network, and API Gateway, when you're using it with a custom domain, is backed by CloudFront. So the domain name that's exposed is a CloudFront domain. Now, when you want to attach an SSL certificate to CloudFront, you have to create the certificate in US East 1. It's just the way it works. It's weird. I don't know why. So in your console, you're going to, from the drop-down, where it might say global, I guess if I go to the home page, it's easier. From here, you'll choose US East, North Virginia. And then from there, you're going to go back to CloudFormation, and you are not going to see your other stack, because that stack was created in, this is the wrong account. That stack was created in another region. So here, you'll see I have already done this, and I have my stack here. So go through and click on create stack, and you're going to use the O1 ACM. And so this one is very basic. We're literally just creating a certificate that has this domain name. This domain name is the same domain for the zone you created. So it's yourname.workshop.devjam.io. Yeah, that should be pretty easy. If you get stuck, raise your hand. I'm going to talk while you're doing it, though. So what this is doing is it's creating a certificate with Amazon Certificate Manager, and it's just a thing that you can use to generate and manage your SSL certificates. Now, you need to verify that you own the domain. So when you create your thing, it's going to go into a pending state. Once into a pending state, if you go to ACM, meaning you click on the service thing at the top, the service thing that's over here, you type ACM, and you click on Certificate Manager, you'll see that you have a pending certificate that says verification not complete. Here you're going to see a long string of gobbledygook. This is a DNS record that you need to create on your domain name to prove that you own it. So you're going to create a CNAME where the value here, the name of the target is this, and then this is the value that you populate. You can see here there's also a button to just create the record in Route 53 for you. You can take the easy route, no one's going to judge you. All this is doing is creating a DNS record. The certificate manager is polling every 5 to 15 minutes to see if you have created this record. As soon as you do, it changes from validation not complete to issued here. And you can see here, I just created a CNAME with those values. As soon as you have done that, your stack will continue eventually, but that'll take time, and you can just leave it. But as soon as you've done that, there's pizza in the back, and you can shove some in your face, assuming you've written some code. So none for John Luigi. Everyone else can have a slice. Yeah.
So basically we have to change to
US East 1, yep.
and then create a new stack with the
Yeah, the O1 ACM.
just like before.
Yeah, and you use the domain name that you entered from the previous stack.
Doesn't matter, we switch to any other location?
We have to use US East 1 because we're going to be attaching this to CloudFront. It's a limitation that if you are going to use an SSL certificate for CloudFront, so even if you created like an S3 bucket and you wanted to put CloudFront in front of it to have a static website that is accessible everywhere in the world, if you want it accessible with HTTPS, then you need to use US East 1 for your certificate. Yeah, it's a limitation of CloudFront. I fought very hard to figure out why this was happening, and it's just the way it is. Yeah.
So Julian, I switched the state and then I went for ACM.
Did you create the CloudFormation stack?
No.
You got to create that first, and then you'll see a thing there.
Okay, so how do I do that?
So go to CloudFormation. You can. And then create stack. Use it. Yep. Template is ready. Click upload file, and you choose the O1.
This one.
Yep.
ACM.
And then go through that, and when it prompts you for domain name, use the same tonino.workshop.devjam.io. Okay.
Can I drop my database? Because I tried to import the file, I canceled the operation,
And now it's in the middle.
constantly complaining that.
Yeah, so log in with MySQL, and then you can, I wouldn't drop the database, you can just drop the tables.
Yeah, but we already tried. So we edited the file, and we did those drop table statements, but it didn't.
So this is an invalid command.
Yeah, but we tried to.
But if you're trying
comment
to,
it out.
yeah, it's double dash.
It's double dash to comment it out. All right.
You can try dropping the database, but then you have to recreate it, and you might have to set up privileges, and that's outside my scope. Okay, so this is the juicy bit of this workshop, Lambda. Lambda is a service that allows you to give it code and it will execute a handler. And it does not create a server, a host, or anything that you need to manage. Your maximum execution time is 15 minutes. There are some memory parameters. You can set up custom VPC and networking and things like that so that things can talk to each other. And this is where it gets complicated with RDS, which is why I just made it open to the world, because then you have to put them in the same VPC and set up their security groups. It's a pain. There's a few different runtimes for Lambda. Java, Ruby, JavaScript, Python. I think they also support .NET, Go, and C# as well. There are a lot of integrations in terms of inputs. So number one, you can just call it anytime you want. You can invoke a function. So you're calling code remotely on a service to do a thing. Imagine you had a host with your code running and you called an endpoint. Similar thing, but it's kind of managed for you. Now they also have a lot of pre-configured input sources or events. So SNS, SQS, DynamoDB, S3, SES, CloudWatch events, log streams, this, that, the other thing. Basically, most of the services within AWS will generate some form of input that you can create a Lambda to react to. You can also use Lambda in step functions, so you can generate a state machine of like, you all know what a state machine is, right? You generate your state machine, and it's basically just calling functions to execute a workflow. It's pretty powerful, it's pretty cool, and there's a lot there. So I'm going to let you do this at your leisure. The point of this part was to create a sample function, kind of tinker with it. And if you want to do this while I'm talking, go ahead. If you go to Lambda in the services dropdown, you can use a blueprint. Where did I put this thing? Yes.
Shall we switch back to Paris?
Yeah. At this point, you want to be back in your region.
And I see my DNS thing is still in progress.
It might take a while. I don't know how often it checks. If it's not done in like the middle of the Lambda thing, then I'm not sure. We can check the DNS thing and see if it's configured correctly. Once we get everyone into their own thing, then I'll come check. If you're just doing this kind of on your own, you can use a blueprint, and you can type in hello world, and then you can choose like hello world Python, which will create basically this very, very simple thing here. You give it a function name, you give it an execution role. This is an IAM role that has the permission to invoke a function. Yeah, the screenshot here is terrible. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it would be this bad. But basically this role just gives it's whatever permissions your Lambda function needs to operate. So if it needs to create log records in CloudWatch, if it needs to create files in S3, if it needs to send emails with SES or put messages on an SQS or SNSQ, you need to make sure that this role has the necessary permissions. Now here, the body of this blueprint is just a very basic function. You can see here that there's a Lambda handler here that takes in two arguments, an event and a context. These are passed in as JSON, and then here they're kind of converted automatically to a dict for Python, a dictionary. In JavaScript, it's still a JSON object. In Java, you get there's a few different inputs. You can either have it create kind of like an object or an input stream, things. It's a lot more customizable. But basically, all this thing is doing is it's printing these values, and then it's going to return you can't even see this. It returns one of the keys of the events. So this is just what it looks like when it's created. You can see that you have your Lambda function called hello world here. You can see that it talks to CloudWatch logs and that there are no triggers for it at the moment. Kind of down here, if you scroll down, there's this like inline code editor. It's Cloud9 Lite, where you can kind of see your basic source files for the dynamically interpreted language, the interpreted languages. You can see them there and you can edit them. But you'll also see here the runtime. So this is the type of language you're using, and then the handler. And so here you can see it's lambda function.lambda handler, which here this is lambda function.py, and this function is called lambda handler. And so you're telling the Lambda service that when this thing is invoked, send the input to this function, and then do whatever thing it's supposed to do. In this case, it's a very, very simple thing where it returns one of the keys. If you continue scrolling down, you can also set up environment variables. You can tags again for metadata. You have your execution role settings, and then here you can set your memory and your timeout. So you can see the default is like 3 seconds, which is really fast. If you're doing very quick tasks, it's great. If you're doing something that might take longer, it's going to time out and return an error. So you can adjust this again up to 15 minutes is the maximum. The next thing, so here you can see there's this little grayed out thing here. This is where you can configure your sample events. The first time you click in that drop down, it'll prompt you to create a test event. When you create a test event, there is an event template that you can choose from, which has all of the different input sources that you might see, including API gateway, SES, blah, 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 blah. For this one, there is a hello world one, which just sends this very basic JSON object with 3 keys. And so what you'll do is you can create the test event, you give it a name, and then you have a body here. And then once you do that, you can see it right here. I have devjam wildcard, and you can click test, and what that does is that invokes your function. So here, going back, you can see hello is key 1, and then here, value 1, value 2, value 3, and then we got value 1 back when this is called. And that's just from hitting the test button with this event. I realize I'm going fast. Are there any questions about that? Is it making sense or is it confusing? Cool. You can also create them. Basically, everything that you're doing with CloudFormation, you can do with the CLI or you can do with the SDK. If you do AWS Lambda help, you'll see all of the various options there. If you do AWS Lambda create function help, you'll see basically the inputs to the create function thing, which are going to be the runtime, the handler, and a pointer for your code, I think at a bare minimum. You might also need to specify the execution role. You can also update your function here, update function code, and you just pass it a new pointer to your code. You can either pass it a pointer to something in S3 that you've already uploaded. I think you can also point it to something locally on your machine, so you could write a function, package it up, and then use this to deploy it. The handlers. Each language, each runtime has its own kind of handler definition. I would recommend you going to the documentation and finding the relevant ones for your language. These are the ones kind of for API gateway. So you can see here in Java, it just has an input stream, an output stream that you reply on, and then like a context. JavaScript has the same things kind of, but in JavaScripty style. Python just has an event and a context, and you return a value. These are the specific ones. If you are using my sample code, you'll see here that it's dev.native.devgem.seinfeld as a service .lambda handler. This is the fully qualified class name, and then : the method, which is handle request. If you were using Python, like we saw in the blueprint, it's the name of the Py file with the name of the method. JavaScript, if you have a functions directory with an export.js and a function called handler, this is what that looks like. I got that from Brittany. Don't blame me for that. Okay. Dependencies. You need to package your Lambda code with everything it needs to run, which means you need your dependencies included in whatever bundle. So in the case of Java, you need a jar file that has all of your dependencies in it. In the case of JavaScript, you need your JavaScript files with a node modules directory. In the case of Python, you have your code at the top level, and you have the packages for the code that you depend on also in the top level. So I would recommend checking out the documentation here for the specifics. But the deployment package basically needs to contain all of your dependencies, and they need to be in a specific format based on what language you're choosing. There is a new thing called layers. I don't know much about it. I think it's a thing that allows you to kind of pre-seed some libraries or some tools into the Lambda function, kind of like a Docker container layer. I don't know much about that. I would recommend looking into that if you are curious. I briefly mentioned earlier SAM, the serverless application model. It is a CloudFormation template with some special tools where you can have the template in the same directory kind of as your main code, and then the SAM file can compile, generate your package, upload it to S3, and then populate your template with the necessary values. There are some resources in SAM that don't exist in CloudFormation. The templates look slightly different. There's a few variations. I'm not going to cover that. It's a tool to make your life easier. We're doing things the hard way. Okay, so we're about to get into like free code mode. And before we do that, you need to know what the input is from API Gateway. The easiest thing to do is to kind of create a function and pull up the sample event. I can pull that up for you in a second to show you. And it just contains everything you'd expect from an HTTP request. It has the path, the body, your query string variables, all of the cookies and headers and metadata information, all in one nice JSON object that you can use to determine what it is you're going to be doing. API Gateway allows you to create like a proxy. So we'll talk about that in a moment, but basically we're creating like a proxy resource such that our Lambda function is handling any call that happens on this URL. So a/b, a/c, foo/bar, whatever, call this Lambda function. That Lambda function will handle sending 404s, 400s, whatever the case may be. You can create a lot more things. I'll talk about that later in very high level detail. But as mentioned here, because we're doing GET requests for this API, we really just care about the path. Okay. So here's a sample event, if you can read it. The body, just whatever like post data, put data you might get in the body of a request. Your resource, this is the API Gateway resource, and you can see maybe that this is / with curly braces proxy plus, which basically means match anything, right? So match anything from the root on. The path is just a standard path that you would expect. This is a post request. The body here you can see is base64 encoded. That's what that means. Query string parameters are foo and bar. Path parameters, this proxy thing here matches the whole path. So you can kind of map those out to get specific fields. You can set stage variables in API Gateway. Don't worry about that for now. You can see all the headers, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what the API routes are that I have created for you, and you can create on your own. What time is it? 8:45. Okay. I'll come back to this slide in a moment. We're going to go forward one, and then we'll go back. Yeah, so feel free to look at what I've created for you. You can assume that the database information will be passed as environment variables when it's being called in Lambda, because the template is set up to do that. But when you're testing it locally, you're going to need to create some sort of entry point that sends the data that you're expecting. So in the case of Java, create like a byte array input stream with some JSON or whatever. With JavaScript, you can send it JSON. With Python, you can set it the Python dictionary notation, et cetera, et cetera. Once you have something that you think will work, you can create a zip file and we can package it and upload it. For right now, I'm going to give you 15, 20 minutes to kind of tinker, and we'll reevaluate if you need more time. These are the routes that are the goal for this thing that use the information from the database. Look at the code I've created for examples, and also ask me questions as they come up. Go.